Hey, everybody. Welcome. It's book club night. This is the best night ever. I love it. And I haven't even started my cocktail yet. So that's how excited I am for tonight. We're going to have a great tour. We're going to have a great. Oh my gosh. We're already getting comments. Oh, it's fantastic. Okay. We've got Bethany on. We've got Renee on. We've even got J. Ryan Straddle, one of everybody's favorite authors. He's here tonight. In fact, I think you have Jay Ryan as one of the people to thank that for this evening tonight, because I think he put Amy and I in touch. Although, to be honest, Amy and I also share an editor. So Elizabeth's here, Vicky is here. Hi, everybody. Hey, start getting your questions ready. And if you even want to log them early, Amy's here, Tracy's here. Oh, this is fantastic. If you even want to log them so they're in the chat, I will make sure we save time for all of the questions, or as much as we can. Okay, just a few items, housekeeping items. Next month, I believe it's the 26th of March or the 23rd. Sorry. Should have looked that up. Anyway, we're reading Beach Read by Emily Henry. I figured it would be a little bit of sunshine in a book as we all don't go into spring break. We're not going to the beach this year. I don't know. Maybe you Californians are. But yeah, it's not in the cards for us yet. So we may as well go there with Emily's book. Okay. Beach Read, Emily Henry. It'll be fun. I'm not quite sure about our guest for next time. TBD to come. Emily was not able to join us. So we shall find another wonderful guest to join us instead. All right. So that is that. Now, tonight, everybody's here because they want to talk about the Imperfects and they want to meet Amy Meyerson. And she's here. She's backstage. I already chatted with her. All right. This book, I call it an OMG book because for me, it was one of those books where I would sit down and I would read it and I'd look at the clock and I'd say, oh, okay, only 10 more minutes. I only have 10 more minutes. And then I told Amy that would turn into an hour, and then it would turn into another hour. And this is one of those books that I really didn't get much done when I was reading it because I was so compelled to keep going, which is the sign of a fabulous book. All right. So I'm going to introduce Amy without further ado. Amy Meyerson. Hi, Amy.
Hi.
Thanks for being here. Did you see the crowd we're already getting? Lots of people already online and logging questions. And Jay Ryan is here just like he told us he would be.
Hi, Ryan.
Yeah. All right. So just a quick introduction of Amy. So Amy, this is your second novel, correct? Because The Bookshop of Yesterdays, which I also loved, came out a couple of years ago. And now this is your second novel. Amy lives in LA now, teaches creative writing at USC. But for those of you who read the book, finished the book, you'll be interested to know she also grew up in Philadelphia. So is that why you set the book in Philadelphia, I'm assuming?
Initially that was why I wanted to write something there because I was feeling kind of homesick while I was writing it. But then I won't spoil anything in case people haven't read it. But as I was doing research, I uncovered this great story about a couple in Philadelphia that I adapted from. So the Helen's journey is based on a true story.
Really?
That was a couple in Philadelphia. And growing up, before I did research, I'd never heard this story. I'm being vague, but that's because I don't want to give anything away. But that was one of those, I don't know what happens for you. But it was like, I make decisions just kind of by my gut and then later realize why I made them. So like I wanted to set it in Philly. And then once I kind of found out about this couple and this piece of untold Philadelphia history, that was sort of when I realized that was really why I set it there.
Oh, that's fantastic. Oh, that's so cool. Okay, so I should tell you, you don't have to worry a ton about spoilers because, yeah, going in, most people have read it. And if you haven't, you're aware that there's going to be spoilers coming, though we'll try to warn you. Okay, so before we get too far in, we always toast. Cheers.
Sorry.
Here's to a wonderful book and a fun discussion coming up. I made myself the yellow diamond. I sent a face or a Instagram post out earlier with all my drink choices, and I'm going to have to be careful with this one. It's half gin, half champagne.
Yeah.
So
all alcohol or
yeah. And half a lemon. So it's going to have me going all night. It's good though. Okay. I do want to start. We're already getting questions and we will save time at the end. Plenty of time for questions. But I do want to start with your inspiration for the book because you write in your author's note, you get straight to this question. And I loved the way you phrase it. You say, I love gemstones and how they are the harmony of geological history, personal history, and in the case of the stone, a stone like the Florentine diamond, international history too. And I loved that. I kept, certainly not as cogently as you put it in your author's note, but that kept striking me throughout the book, just how personally we treat these treasures of ours. And there's certainly stories that outlast us, but the gems themselves, they have no personal connection. So tell me more about that intersection for you, why you love that so much.
Sure. Well, I think it's for a couple reasons. I mean, first of all, it wasn't really the inspiration for it, but the one piece, my mom's mother passed away before I was born, and like the one piece of her that I have is this cocktail ring. That I don't think my mother ever wore because it's one of those things that like wasn't in style for a while, but now I think is like gaudy enough. Or I don't know what's in style anymore.
I have one of those too. Yeah.
And it had this whole story behind it of how my grandmother got it from some of her family that went to South America before World War II and instead of to the U.S. And so it was the way that my mom told me a lot of our family history. So I think that was part of kind of what struck me. And then on top of that, as a hobby I don't really have time anymore, but for years I've done metalsmithing, making jewelry. And so in making jewelry, you learn a lot about stones. And I've just always been fascinated with, I'm not a science person, but the science of it and how they form, but then also how we impose so much, value and meaning onto them. And, just thinking a lot, I like to, as much as possible, like collect family heirlooms and the stories that they represent. And I think that those are very powerful for people, and was interested in the way that can create, especially around something like jewelry that's very valuable, can create friction when we impose different kinds of value onto an item, right? So like the Florentine diamond is worth a lot of money as a diamond. It's also worth a lot of money as a piece of history. And then it's worth a lot of sentimental value to some of the millers because of the stories that it holds. So it felt like a good intersection for a story.
Yeah. And I mean, it's almost inevitable that once something like that comes into a family, that it's not going to result in some level of friction. Oh, okay. So Tracy is asking a question that I was just about to ask as well. So I will read Tracy's question. Let's use Tracy's. I love how Deborah in the book just got a feeling from holding the diamonds. She could feel their energy. And I was going to ask you that too, especially your thoughts around your grandmother's ring and her cocktail ring. Does that resonate with you? Do you feel like these stones have an energy, or maybe not so far as, and how do you say Deborah? Because early in the book, you say it's 3 syllables. So I was rehearsing in my head the entire time I was reading the book. I was like, Deborah, how do you say it?
I think in my head, I've just been calling her Deborah because that's like the normal way that most people would. But I think she would say like Deborah.
Okay.
Like mystique, or I don't know, individuality to a rather standard name for her generation.
That's true. She would like the element of mystique, wouldn't she?
Yeah.
Okay. So, but on the energy, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know. I had a lot of fun writing Deborah because she's very different than I am. She's very different than my mother, and it was fun to kind of to go there in terms of some of the more, I don't know if it's outlandish, but the way that she thinks about the world is really different than I do. So I think what I get out of stones is almost the opposite of feeling, where it's, the, like with my grandmother's ring, I think one of the things that interested me about it was the fact that I could hold it and know that it connects me to the past, but have no knowledge of what that past is. So for me, it's more about like these secret lives that they have. But I do believe that a lot of people, feel energies from things like stones. I mean, there's there's healing crystals and stuff like that. I don't personally own any healing crystals. But so yeah, so I don't know if that's a non-answer or
no. I was just
lying to say that. But yeah, I think I'm interested in the way that, I mean, that's what interests me about like the idea of something being a physical representation of the past, is because it both can and cannot tie you to the past. So it both illustrates like, what you can know and what you can't know.
Right. Well, and it's an ancient idea, because this idea, prime example, the Florentine diamond, that it's cursed, has gone back to what, the 1600s, 1700s, so it's certainly not an idea that Deborah came up with, or that anyone of our generation came up with, whether or not it's true.
I think that if it is cursed, she would feel that. So that's why I, had her get the feeling from it. And while there was a lot of bad luck surrounding the Florentine, I don't think it was cursed. I think it's a very mysterious stone, but I think maybe royals in general are a little bit cursed, perhaps.
Yeah.
Is more.
Well, it was interesting for me as I was reading the book and thinking about this, because it comes up several times in the book, the effect that the diamond has had on the various families that it's resided with. And I kept thinking about it and then trying to apply it to the Millers. And in some places in the book, it's a curse for them too. It certainly feels that way at the beginning and through the first couple of acts, or the first couple of books or parts. And then as we progress, it's in a way, it's a blessing for them. It turns out to be a blessing, because it forces open those emotional doors that they've been closing throughout their family history. And so I could argue, also in effect, that it was a blessing for them. Tell us about the Millers. How did they evolve for you in your head? What were your aspirations for them as a family as you wrote them?
Sure. I mean, well, I think like the most obvious is I wanted them to be flawed. I think, I think every family is of course flawed, but for this book, I really wanted to have fun and sort of dig into the ways in which, our imperfections clash with other people in our family's imperfections, and have this kind of dysfunctional family drama. But one of the things that was really important to me when I was writing this was I wanted the Millers and their stories to be as rich as the history. I think what happens a lot in history, I mean, I love historical fiction, but I think what happens a lot is that the story in the present is there to kind of fuel the story or motivate the story in the past, and then it ends up kind of getting the short end of it. So my goal with them was I wanted each of them, before I started writing, I made sure that I had an idea for an arc for each of their characters, independent of their relationships with each other. And try, it took this book took a lot of plotting, both in terms of the history and then also, making sure storylines coincided at the right moments and stuff. But yeah, it was really important to me that, they grow and heal as a family, but then they also grow and heal as individuals as well. And their interactions as a family and also their knowledge of their family history is kind of what drives both. So yeah, I think, and it was, I wanted to make, like, I didn't hold back on the fight scenes. There were a lot of fun to write. Yeah, I think my goal for them was, the thing that really struck me when I started, which is where the title of the novel comes from. And I have to give Natalie, our editor, I don't know if she's here or not, but give her credit for coming up with the title. But one of the things that struck me right away when I started learning about historic gemstones or unusual gemstones in general is that the way, like if you have, and this is in the book, Victor talks about it, if you have two stones that are perfect, like their clarity is perfect and they're cut the exact same way, there's no way to tell them apart. And so the way in which you identify a diamond is through, they're called clarity characteristics, but through its imperfections, basically. If it has any internal flaws, any feathers, things like that. Oh, Natalie says she's here.
Natalie's here. Natalie, for everyone, Natalie Halleck is our editor. Amy and I are lucky enough to share the same editor, and we could spend the next 20 minutes having a little love fest about how much we love with Natalie and how lucky we are that she picked us out of the pile and took us on. But I know I'm a huge challenge. I'm sure you're a dream to work with, but
oh, I know. we won't make Natalie answer that question.
Yeah, exactly. Natalie is a gem. Welcome. Thanks for joining us, Natalie. Okay, sorry to interrupt you, but yeah. So through their imperfections.
Yeah, and I just thought, I mean, that was one of the earliest things I found. Like I knew, I mean, that the story originated even before I knew about the Florentine diamond. Is I wanted to write a story about a family who inherits a gemstone that's gone missing and what happens out of that. So one of the first things I learned was this fact about how we identify and grade gemstones. And I just thought it was the perfect, metaphor or analogy for a family, that this idea that we identify through our imperfections, through our flaws. And then, once I committed to that idea, I was like, okay, now this family has to be pretty imperfect.
Yeah. Yeah. And there was only one, it was interesting. They all had potential. Only one of them at the beginning of the book, though it becomes very quickly obvious that her life is not perfect. Only one of them in our traditional cultural standards for how we would grade a person in terms of success. The only one is Ashley, who, she lives in the big house and she has I can't, you have some great line, and I wish I would have underlined it, but you have some great line about how much help she has and yet still can't manage her life or something like that. And, but they all aspire to great things, but if we were to grade them unfairly, but the way we tend to culturally, none of them have lived up to their potential.
Yeah, and even though Ashley has that, I mean, they're all stunted in their own ways.
Yeah.
They're all stunted professionally, certainly as well.
And personally, yeah.
Personally, yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, that was the other thing, like when I was, I did a lot of character work for this book before I started writing, which was the first time I'd really, really done that. And one of my goals was to make them all very unique characters from each other as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that their struggles, I don't know, that they reflected different struggles that I see either myself or my friends or people I know having.
Yeah. In fact, that's one of the questions that we've got. Amy asks, she says, curious if the Miller siblings are based on your own family or if you related to one more than the others. And I know you're not going to out your family, but.
Well, I can honestly say that no, none of the characters are anything like, I only have one sibling, and Jake is not like my brother. The parents are not like my parents, but they are based. What I like to do with characters is do kind of a composite. Like I take two or three people and kind of blend them together into one. So they're definitely borrowed in that regard. Actually, the case with Ashley's husband, and then also Victor's case with Tiffany's, both of those are based off of cases that my dad had. He's a lawyer a long time ago. So in that way, I mean, this was the first time I really, before this book, like I had to show my first book to my parents once I knew it was getting published. But before that, they'd never seen anything that I'd ever written. And yeah, until it was inevitable. But with this book, they helped me, my dad in particular, because he's a lawyer, helped me from the beginning. So I did borrow pretty heavily from his cases, which was fun. But yeah, they're I think some of what, I guess from my family, more so with my mom than my brother or dad, but I don't think our fights are as extreme, but that idea of the way in which you can have this huge fight and then just instantly forgive each other and not even have to apologize, is definitely something that, that my mom and I share. And
oh yeah. My mom and I have that absolutely. But it's interesting because in the book, I resonate a lot too, though, with those fights that you have with people you love, where they're almost more disturbing because you can't immediately forget them. Those are the ones that really throw you off. At least me, they throw me off my center. And I could connect with the family in a lot of ways. This is by no means is this a haha type story. So it on the surface, it might seem like an odd choice for a book club that's dedicated to, kind of making us laugh and raising our spirits. And yet it's the perfect book because one of the criteria I have for selecting these books does the story connect us with characters that leave us feeling better about ourselves or humanity or, just what's going to happen tomorrow. And I did laugh at some of the fights because I could, I could feel how sometimes I could predict exactly when they were going to turn on each other because, I have a loving, contentious relationship with my brother. And sometimes I was just like, I know, oh, it's going to go. Yeah. And then it went. But at the same time, all the characters they come together at the end. By coming together, I mean like where they're broken, a lot of those pieces within themselves start to heal, start to kind of come back together. They re-glue themselves.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's hard to be funny on purpose, right? It has to sort of happen organically. And I was glad that some of I had fun when I was writing those scenes. I'm glad that some of the humor came naturally while I was writing. But I think I think if you don't make fight scenes funny, it's kind of like how the villain or the antagonist has to be like the most charismatic character in a story, right? If you don't make them funny, then they just get really heavy. They are kind of funny, essentially, right? Fundamentally, fights, looking back on them, the things that trigger us, or the way that we, explode in both predictable and unpredictable ways, and the way we deal with things from the past.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's the only thing that makes humor work is if it resonates as human, if it resonates with you as a person. Were you prepared for the level of research that came with this book? In fact, the blurb on the back by Jay Ryan calls it exquisitely researched, and I would second that. I kept putting on my writer's hat throughout the book, thinking this is intense. Were you prepared for that at the beginning? Did you expect it?
I don't know. Yes. I mean, I think I know myself, and I'm a perfectionist and an overachiever. So it's another reason I think, like for reasons of the story, I didn't want it to be historical fiction going in the past. I really wanted it to be about what can we learn about the past based on what's left behind. Like, can we piece a story together and know the past just from the artifacts that are left, even when the people that experienced it can't tell us about it. So there were like thematic reasons why I wanted to set it in the present, but there's also the practical reasons of, other than the prologue, if I tried to write historical fiction, like straight historical fiction, I don't know that I'd ever stop researching. Because yeah, I mean, I love it and I get really fascinated by it, but it's also I just like this need to get everything perfect, even though I'm not sure what that necessarily means with research. But so I probably did more research than maybe some other people would do to get the same amount of facts into a story. One of the nice things about working at a university is you have access to their library. Mm-hmm. And so I actually haven't been able to return them because of COVID, but I have like massive stacks of books about the Habsburgs. I mean, I read all the way back to I don't know, the 12th or 13th century of the Habsburgs. I wasn't super fascinated, I will admit, in like World War I history. I found the war itself pretty confusing.
Yeah.
Lands. But, I read a lot about World War I. I just felt like I needed to know more than I was putting on the page. But ultimately, I think that all the research made the writing process a lot quicker. So it was heavy in terms of the reading pretty early on, but I used it to create the plot. So, I knew with this book, because I didn't have it with my first one, that I needed to know the end before I started writing. So I needed to know how Helen had the diamond. And I created that story from reading about the Habsburgs and the fall of the empire, and then also reading about the 50 children. So I took those 2 points from history and kind of merged them. But then also with the civil forfeiture case, for instance, which I didn't even know really what, beyond like hearing about it in like drug cases and stuff. I didn't really know what a civil forfeiture case was, or that that's what would apply for this kind of cultural heritage law. But I knew that I wanted, so I'm going to spoil stuff because you said I could. I knew that I wanted to have a plausible case for the Millers lawfully having the diamond. And then I also knew that I wanted the diamond to go missing at the end, that they couldn't have it, like, because ultimately it's not about, the gains that they would get from the diamond. It's about the way in which it brings them together. So I didn't know how to make either of those things happen, particularly what the steps were for a legal case. And so all the research I did on that is what drove the last third of the story. And so it was a really good lesson in how research can actually be plot. It's not just like informative background.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, it's almost 7:30, and so we're going to start taking our final questions. If you want to think about them and start logging them now, do that. And I have 2 questions in the meantime for Amy. The first is, let's talk a little bit about Beck. So Tracy has a question about Beck being a paralegal. Was she always a paralegal, or did she evolve as your writing her evolved? And my question about Beck is, why was she the one who inherited the brooch?
She was a paralegal from the start for a couple of reasons. I wanted somebody in the family to know about the law a little bit. I thought it would help facilitate the story. And then I was really interested in, because I have a good friend who works at law school. She's a law professor, so maybe she was influencing me, but very interested in the character and fitness test on the bar, and kind of what kinds of behavior would disqualify you from that, and that it's, the way that my friend Alex would explain it is it's about a moral action, not a criminal action. And I've always just been really interested in the law and that distinction between what's like moral, what's ethical, and what's legal. So I think it was one of those things too, where I decided really early on that was her arc with law school, and then it just worked really well with the other parts of the story. And then your other question about Beck, I forgot what it was.
No, I was curious why you chose her as the recipient of the brooch.
Got it. Because I think that I've had a lot of questions about this. And I do think that Helen left it to her because she expected her to share it with her family. So she knew Beck well enough to know that she would do that, and that would be a somewhat difficult decision for her, but that would be a step in her growth.
Gotcha.
And also I think, I liked playing around with like the fact that she left, like with Deborah and with the siblings, and sort of what goes to who, and how that often, even in the closest of families, these kinds of inheritances can trigger fights, and this idea of who's more deserving. And I think initially Beck Beck would think that it was left to her because she's more deserving of it, because she was the closest. But that's not actually why Helen left it to her. It's because she knew that it would compel her to do the right thing.
Yeah. Those little influences just never end, do they? Oh, I love it. I love it. Helen speaking from beyond. Helen having the last word. All right. So my final question to every author that I have on here is one that I, even as a writer, am curious about. And I find that readers are really curious about that too. This too. What's it like in your head while you're writing? What do you see or hear, or what's your experience?
I think it grows and changes over the course of writing. But I think pretty early on, the characters become real people to me, and they become real people like separate of the people that I think that they're based on. And I think there's always this, and maybe it's a little of the madness of writing, but there's always a point where I start to forget that they aren't real people and these aren't real men.
I know.
So yeah, I think I find that stepping away from the page is really helpful. When I was writing this, I was swimming a lot, and I find that my best ideas come to me when, like, I'll in an ideal day, I'll write until I'm sort of stuck, and then go do some form of exercise usually, and then that kind of clears my head. So I think, and then that helps me kind of fix ideas. But I think also I really like images of certain scenes, like things come to me, I guess, really acutely, and then I figure out kind of the story around them. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting how it's, you know, it's I guess it's part of what becomes kind of sad, that by the time you end up talking about a story, you're sort of moved past it onto another one.
I know.
The writer, that there's this period where these characters are alive for you, and then they're not as much anymore. I mean, they still, I guess the further away, they still feel like real people.
Yeah.
Like you haven't talked to for a while. But it's interesting too, the way that I think, especially with characters, because I find character the hard. I think everyone has parts they find the hardest. I find the character development to be the part that I have to really actively think about. But it's so interesting what you think of a character in your head versus how the readers interpret them, and the responses.
Yeah, I find that too. And I don't know. I in a way, I feel like I have to see the character, but in my head, like, the setting is much more visual than the character's face in the moment. But I have to know, I almost feel like I have to know, I have to pick a face that goes with them before I can understand what's behind them. That's strange to, but you're absolutely right. By the time you're out there talking about the book, you've moved well into another story. So that leads us to the question that everybody always asks. Are you ready to talk about what you're working on next?
I don't know. That's a weird response. I should tell you that
I don't know. Absolutely fair.
Natalie, we're still here. The new book I'm working on, Natalie and I kind of like came up with the idea together, which is the first time I've ever done that. It was really, really fun. But it's also it's kind of the I think it's, I don't know, it's the first time that I'm writing while figuring out the story at the same time. And so I haven't been talking about it really but it's, I'll try.
No, you don't have to. I mean, everybody's.
I want to. I have to. I'm trying to get better at pitching it, because I'm really excited about it, and it's been the most fun I've ever had writing anything.
Oh, that's terrific. Okay.
It's a little bit magical. It's about a woman who discovers that she has this gift for writing stories that make people fall in love. So it's not like she's not a matchmaker or fortune teller, but she writes these kind of abstract stories that kind of open people up in the ways that they need to finding someone. So once she discovers she has this gift, she meets this mysterious old woman who's looking to hire her, that kind of throws everything for a loop, and mystery ensues. But it's about, I guess Natalie was like, I think you should write a love story. And this is my version of a love story. So it's not necessarily a romance, although there's a little bit of that. It's more about writing and influence and, why people fall in love and the lasting power of love. I've been listening recently to a lot of the modern love stories.
Yeah, the podcast. Mm-hmm.
I've been listening to the book that they put together, and so many are so depressing.
Yes.
Which is an interesting thing to think about in terms of love stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's the most sought after column that you can get published is to publish your modern love piece.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of them are incredibly sad. Do you consider, this, I said that was my last question, but I was, after reading Bookshop of Yesterdays and The Imperfects, and now hearing about your next book, do you consider yourself at heart a mystery writer, even though no one would necessarily shelve you as mystery and certainly not detective or anything, but are you driven by mystery?
I have been recently. I think it's something that's sort of, I love a good story, right? Mm-hmm. And I realized, when I was writing the Bookshop of Yesterdays, the thing I was paying attention to, and this also comes from teaching. One of the things I really like about teaching is that when you give advice to your students, you kind of have to take it yourself.
Oh, gosh,
or reaffirms these ideas for yourself. And I always tell them to, pay attention to what kind of reader you are. What do you like and why do you like what you like? And that's a really good place to think about what you want to write. And so one of the things I realized when I was starting to write the Bookshop of Yesterdays is that I really like to get lost in stories. The greatest compliment for me that I think I can get is if people want to keep turning the page.
Yeah.
So I think for me anyway, a big part of a story is there's a lot of ways to define a mystery, right? But there is that mysterious quality of you want to find out what happened. So I in recent years, I've been reading a lot more like psychological thrillers and things that have really good stories. And I'm also, even though I like to write things that are for more a general audience or commercial audience, I do like to play around with form and structure. Mm-hmm. And so I think the mysterious element kind of goes with that and kind of, figuring out this new book has a big twist in it, and I haven't 100% figured out how I'm going to make that work, but I like that challenge.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the Bookshop of Yesterdays is essentially a literary treasure hunt, so you have it in you. I can see how it drives you. Well, okay. So we're going to start to wrap up. Thank you, everybody. Amy has one final question, and she's wondering if you'll revisit the Millers, particularly the relationship between Victor and Deborah.
I would love to. I had this idea when I first was writing it, I ended it a little sooner, and I was like, it's a cliffhanger and I'll have to write a sequel. And then both my agent and Natalie were like, no, because I wanted to end it right when they find out the diamond's missing. And they were both like, no, we need to see what happens after that. But I know I have a good idea of where Victor is. And
oh, you do? Okay, great.
Yeah. And also I mean, I don't know when I would write it, but I'm very, from making jewelry myself, and I didn't work with diamonds, but going to the diamond district in New York and stuff like that, there's a lot of interesting characters and seedy underworld of gemstones that I didn't really get into in this book that could be fun to.
Yeah. Victor could have he already does a rich backstory, but he could really fly open on the page, couldn't he?
Yeah, I think so. He was definitely one of those. I didn't realize that he was the one that stole the diamond until about 2/3 of the way through the book.
Okay.
I was writing a scene where he's with Deborah and he explains to her why he took advantage of Tiffany's, even though they were good to him. And just sort of this idea of you can't fight your own nature. And he saw an opportunity and he took it. And I was like, oh, he's going to steal the diamond at the end.
I loved that. I actually called that. And, you know, I love when authors give you just a little bit of, satisfaction in figuring the small things out. You know, I want the bigger mystery that I can't predict, but I called Victor and I was like, yes, I got it.
I mean, that's what's so interesting with readers is like some people it like ruins a book if they know what happens at the end. Some people it makes a book because they feel good about discovering it. And
yeah,
you know, it's hard to write a mystery of any element that like some people aren't going to figure out. And
yeah.
I always figure it out before. I don't mean that as a bragging because I also immediately forget the ending of every book after I read it. But I tend to figure it out, and I like that because that's like one of my goals as a reader is to see. But then other people feel very betrayed when they. So.
Yeah. Well, you certainly kept me turning the pages. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. This was so
thanks
fun.
for having me. This was fun, and thanks to everyone for coming and for reading.
Yeah. We can't wait for your next book. And everybody, thanks again for joining us tonight. I hope if you haven't finished the book that you will pick it up and finish it and then recommend it because it is certainly worthy of your recommendations. At least I feel that way. Thanks to Natalie Halleck for all of her work with both of us and for putting us together. And special thanks to J. Ryan Straddle, who also joined us tonight on the chat and for connecting Amy and I and recommending the book so wholeheartedly as you did in our conversations. So good night, everybody. We'll see you in March with Beach Read, and please stay safe. Get your vaccinations.
Really fun too. I thoroughly enjoyed that book.
Which one?
Beach Read.
Oh, good. All right. Good night, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks, Amy.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.